Hello and welcome to our Sunday school time here at Temple Baptist Church. It is good to be back with you again today and bring you another lesson out of, we're in Daniel. And I don't know how I draw the luck of getting Daniel and the lion's den, but I did. And so it's, as I find it, it's probably one of the most familiar stories in the Bible. It's one of the well-known books of the Bible, and this experience that Daniel is having here in the lion's den, but if we stop and think about it just a little bit, Daniel only had to spend one night in the lion's den. Now that's maybe a little bit of a thing to think about that you think over time, but he spent a number of years in the kingdom that was against everything and against him. But as we look at this today, and this may well be the shortest Sunday school lesson in history. I don't know. As I think about this and begin to think about things of Daniel and the things that he went through here, it kind of makes me wonder sometimes, just what do we, how relevant is this today to us? How relevant is it that we see Daniel, I don't want to use the word disobey, but he actually is. He's disobeying a rule of the king that said that for 30 days you couldn't pray to anybody other than the king. So, these people that were after Daniel because of the position that he held. He was, under Nebuchadnezzar, he had some positions, and then King Darius here, he brings up to some things that done, and he gets promoted even to the very top. And so this didn't sit well with those that were around him. And so, of course, this is a plot to bring Daniel down. They had looked at Daniel, and we'll read our lesson here in just a little bit. They had, they looked at Daniel, just kind of trying to summarize here this morning. They looked at Daniel and knew that they were not going to be able to find any fault in him whatsoever. His character was such that they were just not going to be able to do that. The only way they were going to be able to do that was to get him to do something that he would normally do, and that was his practice of prayer. Daniel had a practice of prayer. He would go back and you think about chapter 1 a little bit, and I think chapter 3 also plays a part in this today. The 3 Hebrew children that were thrown in the fiery furnace, and why they were thrown in there, and then Daniel here being thrown in the lion's den. They just refused to not serve their God. I don't think it's an act of rebellion. Sometimes people rebel against God, but I don't think this is really an act of rebellion. I think this is just the fact that, hey, I'm going to serve God. And those of us that have benefit of walking with God for a number of years or whatever, we get to see the firsthand just how the Bible is right about everything. The Bible is right about everything. All the things that we see today, all the things that we see in our culture today that says that the Bible is not right, but the Bible is right about everything. The Bible is right about money, true commitment, sex, marriage, leadership, relationships, and just go on and on. It could go on and on about the things that the Bible is correct about. And as Daniel gets in this thing here, and we'll look at it a little bit. And like I say, I struggle with these lessons like this here. Seem to me like they're just so. I'm preaching to the choir when you're teaching a Sunday school lesson on Daniel and the lion's den. Like I said, if you have been around church at any time during your life as a youngster growing up, maybe in Sunday school or Bible studies or whatever, you heard about Daniel and the lion's den. You heard about the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace. So it's nothing new to us, and but it is relevant today. I think one of the things that I think the point is today, that the account of Daniel in the lion's den and the 3 Hebrew children that were through in the fiery furnace, that can trust God in all circumstances. We can trust Him. Others are try to limit our worship and discourage us from taking our faith too seriously, and so we have that today. In some places today, believers face persecution, don't they, and death for their faith. But we don't have that here in America yet. There's a lot of mandates that seem to be coming down the pike, but yet the mandate that we can't pray in public, we can't worship in public, we can't do this, we have to worship this God or that God has not come down yet, and thankfully and hopefully those never will come down. But we trust God. He knows our situation and will act in our situation to bring honor to Himself as we remain faithful to Him. I think that's the key today, is remaining faithful to God. And so, our lesson text today is in the book of Daniel, and we're getting right on through Daniel here in our Sunday school lessons. We're in chapter 6. Verses 10 through 24, and we'll just read those and see a little bit about what is going on here in the life of Daniel and his commitment to God. It says in verse 10, when Daniel learned that the documents had been signed, he went into his house. The window in his upstairs room opened towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to God, to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went up as a group, found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. All right. I think a thing that we need to point out here, that this is not something that, as I said, Daniel is not doing this in rebellion. He's not saying, hey, I don't care what the king says, I'm going to do this. He's doing this, I think it was as his custom. He got down on his knee and prayed to God and gave thanks to God, just as he had done before. He'd done this from, I would say, almost day one. Going back to when they were first brought in, he purposed in his heart that he was going to serve God. He was going to keep the laws, the dietary laws, and he didn't want to eat the king's portion. He didn't want to eat the things that were to the king, and so he was. He was maybe not present when these officers brought this decree to the king and to enact this thing. But he went into his house. He didn't go in there to hide, did he? He had the window open, the window facing Jerusalem. We can talk about that a little bit. That was a practice of praying towards Jerusalem. That was the thing that they done, and it was Jewish people still probably face Jerusalem when they pray, and in fact, I think in the ancient synagogues in Israel normally oriented towards Jerusalem. So they were facing Jerusalem. Daniel is facing Jerusalem. He wants to go home. He's in captivity and he wants to go home. But, like I say, this is something he done today, 3 times a day. Didn't just, not just one time, not just occasionally, but Daniel was faithful, and 3 times a day going into his room with the window open and praying to God, facing Jerusalem on his knees and doing that. And Daniel is giving thanks before his God. He has what I would call a deep gratitude for God, to God, for leading and guiding his life. And I think it also reveals here that Daniel prayed a routine as he did aforetime. It wasn't just a one-time deal. He said, I'm going to do this, and so he did. And the word, you talk about these men, refers to the accusers of Daniel. I don't know how many was in that group, but they would have, they come together as a group, so they have all the witnesses they could get to prove that Daniel is not following the mandate that the king has put down, and so making supplication before the Lord. And they were seeking to find fault with Daniel, and instead they found him seeking his God. Now, if that's a fault, then that is a good fault to have, isn't it? To be one that is found seeking God. And he just maintained his spiritual discipline, even though he had been the mandate had been made that he shouldn't do that. So they approached the king in verse 12. And so they approached the king and asked about his edict. Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitioned any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den? And of course the king answered, as a law of the Medes and the Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. In other words, it can't be, once the king signed that, it was law and it wasn't nothing going to be taken from it. Then they replied to their king, Daniel, one of the Judeans exile, has ignored you. Now, here's the thing. These men are plotting against Daniel, and they just and then they say he's doing this 3 times a day, so he's not obeying your mandate. And what are we going to do about that? And as soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased, and he set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. All right, here the king is backed in a corner, isn't he? He's backed in a corner, and the king, even the decree that went out, the king could not overrule at this time. The Medes and the Persians, they just wouldn't overrule anything that had happened, and so they're telling the king these next verses here. Then these men went together to the king and said unto him, your majesty, that is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no edict or ordinance of the king established can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him in the lion's den. The king said unto Daniel, may your God, who you continually serve, rescue you. Just pause there a minute and think about that. Here, I don't know that Darius really believes this. I don't know whether he's just saying that just to kind of, sometimes we say that well, God will take care of you in that situation, and but maybe in our situation we wouldn't trust that, but he did. And then they placed him in the lion's den. A stone was rolled over it, and then the king put his seal on it, and that nothing in the noble, so that nothing in regards to Daniel could be changed. Okay, here we are. We have Daniel in the lion's den. We have the stone rolled in front of it. We have the seal put on it. It reminds me a lot about what Jesus went through. Jesus was falsely accused, wasn't he? He was falsely accused of things by the government at that time, and then he was crucified. And then, the false charges was brought against him. These charges are brought against Daniel. I maybe wouldn't say they're false charges, but they weren't really charges other than the fact that these group of people, these other princes and rulers, had against Daniel because he was so favored by the king. And so, but Jesus was done that way. But Jesus was fulfilling God's plan and perfectly, and he seemed rejected and alone. The night before he went to the cross, Jesus assured his followers that they would face persecution in the world, and we do that, don't we? We know that we do that, and but then here's Daniel in the lion's den. Here's Jesus on the cross. Here's Jesus in the tomb. Here's the stone there. Here's the seal, and now the waiting time. Here, and you would have thought the king would just go on about his business, but it says, then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No divisions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. Well, the king is really disturbed by the fact that he's had to throw Daniel in the lion's den. Just think about it. And Daniel gets a good night's sleep, doesn't he? We know that. Daniel gets a good night's sleep, but the king doesn't, does he? The king kind of has some problems here. And, he arose very early in the morning. At the first light, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel. Daniel, servant of the living God, the king says, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue from the lion? All right, here's the king. Goes out that early that morning, and he hollers to Daniel, and it's in the lion's den. I don't know whether he expected Daniel to answer or not, but maybe hopefully he was. Maybe he felt that maybe Daniel's God that he had bragged about would save him. But then, I imagine, just think about the thought of thinking that Daniel is dead, but yet Daniel is going to speak to him out of the lion's den, and Daniel, serving of the living God, whom you continually serve, rescued you from the lion. Then Daniel spoke with the king. May the king live forever. He says, my God sent his angels and shut the lion's mouth, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him, and also before ye, your majesty. I have not done harm. Now, here's Daniel's response to the king, and now the king is going to be overjoyed. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the lion's den. When he was brought up from the lion's den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. Now, it doesn't say we're not going to have persecution, does it? But it does say that God will protect us. We may get through in the lion's den someday. We don't have lion's dens today, but we may get through into something because of our faithful stand for God. Now again, we don't want to be rebellious about things. I know we're encouraged to obey government as long as it does not go against God's word. And so those things are there. And then after this, and of course the king gives the commandment that these men who had accused Daniel or brought and thrown in the lion's den, their children and their wives. He's going to get everybody. Somebody, if he just got the men, later on the children growed up, they could come back and get vengeance for this, come back against him, and just get all of it. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Here, Daniel, the night before, has been thrown in the lion's den, and nothing has happened to him. And these that are thrown in there before they even reach the bottom of the pit, I don't know how deep this pit was. That'd be deep enough to keep the lions from jumping out. I'm pretty sure of that. But but they just immediately devoured them, just without hesitation. They devoured them and took them. That was I guess you could say that's the end of things if you want to. But and again, I want to emphasize this, getting ready to end this lesson, and just again that reminder that we can trust God in all circumstances. Now, it takes faith to do that, doesn't it? It takes faith to do that, but we have to have that faith. And like I say, others will try to limit our worship and discourage us from taking our faith too seriously and that time of things. But, you know, and sometimes we may even eventually have to face challenges that persecution from that, challenges of our faith and threaten our way of life and maybe life itself. And so, you know, the closer we are to God, the more apt and the more that we do this as a daily thing. Let's go back to that Daniel done it 3 times a day, not just because the mandate had been brought out, but because that was his practice. And our practice should be of serving God. You know, we can trust God. He knows our situations and will act in our situations to bring honor to himself. You know, the king goes out and you know, says that you know, just there's not any other God you can serve. You worship Daniel's God. So let's just keep in mind that as we go through life, that we can trust God in all circumstances. We thank you for being with us today. We hope in some way we have encouraged you a little bit in your walk with God. And just remember that God is in control of all circumstances. May God bless you is our prayer.